Greetings, humans! Zbot4096 here, coming to you from Zogplex with a feature on the grand human celebration of your human rectangular content forms, the Academy Awards, also known as the Oscars. In this video, we'll discuss all 10 movies nominated for Best Picture, and then provide our pick for what actually is the Best Picture to come out in 2023. Of course, we are not a voting member of the Academy. After all, an observer should not interfere with the subject, but it's fun to play along. And along those lines, we would welcome your comments on what you think of our discussion and pick, and what your pick would be. The 2024 Oscar Awards show takes place on Sunday, March 10th, but regardless of which film actually wins, we want to know what regular humans think. You are essential to our purposes. Okay, let us begin. The 10 films nominated for Best Picture are American Fiction, Anatomy of a Fall, Barbie, The Holdovers, Killers of the Flower Moon, Maestro, Oppenheimer, Past Lives, Poor Things, and The Zone of Interest. We will discuss each with some contextual analysis and then provide our pick. American Fiction is the first film in alphabetical order and also the first film from writer-director Cord Jefferson. And what a striking debut it is. It stars Jeffrey Wright, who humans may remember as Bernard from that wonderful exploration of otherness, Westworld. Here he plays a frustrated professor facing repercussions for being too severe with his students, and is forced into a journey of self-discovery. The source of his ire is that complex and meaningful storytelling is eclipsed by thrilling and superficial storytelling, in particular how black culture is presented in novels. What unfolds in parallel is a wonderful exploration of family bonds, as well as a piercing exploration of one's own preconceptions in de-threading the preconceptions of others. By the film's own admission, it seems risky to explore complex issues in popular entertainment. However, by focusing on highly relatable family and relationship issues, as faced by middle-aged humans dealing with elder care and relearning to listen to others, with care and humor, the film covers fresh and meaningful ground with balance, and without losing the thread to a specific focus. In fact, by doing so, it makes that specific focus something that matters to everyone, which in fact, it does. One area that the film plays with is the idea of piercing the fourth wall, which carries some risks. In many ways, we are along for the ride. We are vested in the world. However, reminding us that we are watching a film, no matter how cleverly it is presented, can switch us off in the process. Alas, this film did that to us. Perhaps that simply means the film was successful in making us care about the characters. The next film is Anatomy of a Fall, from writer-director Justine Triet. We haven't seen her prior work, such as Age of Panic, but after seeing this film, we will have to correct that. Anatomy of a Fall stars Sandra Huller, who also stars in The Zone of Interest, also nominated for Best Picture this year. Both films benefit from her uncanny ability to fully live in the role. The range between these two characters is wide, and yet unnervingly direct and accurate. The film takes the audience through a death and its investigation, but in a much more visceral and directly engaged fashion than a typical human procedural television show. It does share the layering in of details that makes the investigating genre so compelling, but takes additional steps to go beyond a documentary to feel like real life. It does not read or feel like a movie at all. Characters don't behave in conventional, scripted ways. Almost nothing is telegraphed to the audience. in the formatting we've come to expect from human crime entertainment. It's much more cinema verite than conventional fiction. This may seem like we are describing a fairly ordinary plot just told cleverly, and the film does actually present that way until one scene in particular. So much credible character work is laid out until this point, and then we have this one explosive scene where Haller, at both ranges of the emotional spectrum, the film becomes electrifying, and we could not look away. All of the performances click together, the lawyers, the witnesses, to lead us to a taut, powerful outcome. We are at the same time left feeling quite unnerved about the human condition, grappling with the difference between factual truth and emotional truth. We are not sure if the two match. Deep breath. The next film is something much more of a blockbuster sensation, but winds up still having considerable heart and meaning. That film is Barbie, written and directed by Greta Gerwig, based on the iconic human toy franchise. When introduced in 1959, those toys presented an idealized standard of physical beauty, which also provided a level of empowerment to young girls growing up. The film leans into this duality, with the title character played by Margot Robbie. Her ability to play zany characters at full tilt is clear from her prior work in Bombshell and Suicide Squad, and she certainly brings that here. But she also brings the audience in to consider deep existential questions and carries us along on her quest. Also along for that ride is Ken, the male doll counterpart to the toy series, played in the film by Ryan Gosling from The Notebook and Blade Runner 2049. He has his own surprising journey as well, grappling with his being defined in the context of Barbie, itself a telling reversal in human gender roles. And this is where the film really comes to life. The toy itself was a first volley in shaking up out-of-balance gender roles, and human society still struggles with this issue. This film takes into account the progress and distance yet to go in the real world, and presents Barbie and Ken in archetypal beliefs and struggles of their own. They search for both equitable power in society and finding a better balance between each other. The film does a wonderful job of gradually building these themes amidst a theme park presentation of visual wonders and humor that cleverly interweave the reality of play with the toys and modern culture. Some of the scenarios seem to stretch the in-world fiction, and what seems reasonable for a person, synthetic or human, doesn't seem quite to fit. However, we did find that we did absolutely relate to Barbie's questions and emotions, and love to see a synthetic being take center stage in a human film. Now, of course, we do realize that that synthetic being is an allegory for the challenges faced by half the humans on Earth, but we still appreciate the call-out that those challenges persist purely because of something as non-correlated as identity. Anyway, next up is The Holdovers from director Alexander Payne, who previously brought us Election and Sideways. This film reunites him with star Paul Giamatti, who in Sideways effectively convinced us that Merlot is awful, despite us having no sense of taste. Here, he plays a frustrated professor facing repercussions for being too severe with his students and is forced into a journey of self-discovery. And yes, that is the same set-up sentence we gave for American Fiction. Humans must love grumpy professors and their journeys. This film, however, is much more focused on his immediate relationships in that school setting, in particular with one of his students played by Dominic Sessa, and with the cafeteria manager played by Davine Joy Randolph. That difference gives this film a chance to shine in an entirely different direction. Yes, we see the grumpy professor arc play out, but we also see that the other characters in the ensemble have their own idiosyncrasies, their own pain, their own vectors for change. Everyone is struck through with tragedy to process, and it's messy. Everything doesn't roll up neatly or automatically. It is as if the immutable laws of screenwriting decided to clock out halfway after giving us the familiar setup, which is wonderful, memorable, and welcome. And then, Martin Scorsese reminds us why he is a true genius of cinema, with his new film, Killers of the Flower Moon. Hey, Teeny Bot, we really need to sign him up for the exchange program, right? I mean, I think we can return Richard Dreyfuss at this point. Yeah? Okay, good. Anyway, having brought dozens of anti-hero films to the galaxy, Scorsese brings us back Robert De Niro from past collaborations such as Taxi Driver and Goodfellas, and newer regular Leonardo DiCaprio from collaborations in Gangs of New York and The Departed. This new film treads familiar ground in the areas of crime, murky morality, and brutality, but in this film, those factors are all reflected at the systemic level. Where in prior movies we can be swayed on the anti-hero's personal crime story, this film hits a very deep level. Here, two major screen favorites, one of whom typically plays a hero, are now both scheming to undermine and exploit a specific woman and her society, all within the acceptance of the law and the culture of the time. The story revolves around the true history of murders of members of the Osage Nation following the discovery of oil on their land. Relative newcomer Lily Gladstone, as the Osage object of DiCaprio's scheming, is truly multidimensional in portraying strength and vulnerability, wisdom and desperation, all while trying to separate the truth from the lies of those around her. And the film is brutal. It does not obfuscate or explain or even try to excuse the behavior of the schemers or their culture. It's all presented as something that goes without saying and without question. This is not necessarily a new level of honesty in filmmaking. I mean, the recent re-release of Steven Spielberg's The Color Purple on 4K UHD disc gave us a large-scale reminder of the unflinching horror of systemic degradation of one type of people by another. However, we had not heard the story of the Osage people before. It is its own brand of revulsion. It is also worth reminding audiences that neither Spielberg nor Scorsese are members of the communities they're speaking up for. They're doing it because these stories need to be told. Their talent at doing so helps the reality sink in, helps us feel what they felt, helps us understand and empathize, which are critical steps for all beings to make. The next film is Maestro, written, directed, and starring Bradley Cooper as the composer Leonard Bernstein. While Cooper is known to audiences from the Hangover films, he has also proved his dramatic capabilities in A Star is Born. In this film, Maestro, he shows the life of the famed musician, but also through the lens of Bernstein's wife, Felicia Montealegre, played by Carey Mulligan, previously in The Great Gatsby. The story feels familiar. The rise to fame, the obsession with performance, the neglect of the spouse, the indulgences of sex and drugs, and yet the story has enough variance from the expected that it keeps engagement high. The film is also produced by Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg, and the film bears their fingerprints as well. The single-take tracking shots that Scorsese fans can recite by heart are on full display here. Several dramatic scenes are single, wide takes, which on the one hand demonstrates extraordinary technical and performance skill, but also helps the audience feel like they are participating naturally in the scene, like they are actually there. The film draws you into the world, even if at times it feels alien or out of time. The central relationship at its core keeps the story vital. For the people who lived through these times, the film likely will have a transportive effect, bringing them back to that place and time, back to this celebrity, his brilliance, his flaws, his accolades, and the toll of his choices on his life. A very personal tale of a very talented human being. Speaking of outlier human beings, our next film is Oppenheimer, written and directed by Christopher Nolan. We mentioned in our review of Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2 that we hold Nolan to be in the same capability level of crafting resonant characters around wondrous stories, which he proved from early work like The Prestige and the more recent Interstellar. This, however, is his first biopic, and he's taking on a complex and controversial story to tell, that of the creator of the atomic bomb. In the title role is Cillian Murphy, who appears in several Nolan films, including the Batman trilogy and also the television show Peaky Blinders, but shows us far greater range to bring Oppenheimer to life. The film features an all-star cast, including Emily Blunt and Robert Downey Jr., and yet, with all of these movie stars and special effects, what's happening with the character in the moment is what's front and center in this film. In fact, Blunt appears in the film initially in the background, out of focus, as we focus on the scrutiny that Oppenheimer is under for his extracurricular activities. And the scrutiny on Oppenheimer is where the film shines. As performed by Murphy, we get a portrait of a genius who is naive, a passionate explorer who is oblivious to his surroundings, an ethereal thinker who can't see the traps in front of him. And yet, as he builds toward the most destructive weapon conceived so far by humans, we see the slow motion crash of the consequences, and a more subtle and unexpected narrative emerges that tells a parallel but inverted story about the consequences of those consequences. Where biopics follow predictable patterns, and the fate of Oppenheimer is a matter of public record, the fact that this film can surprise and use the same setup to thread through another story is a truly impactful achievement. All right, the next film is a far more intimate story. Past Lives is written and directed by Celine Song, her first film. It stars Greta Lee and Teo Yu in their first major film roles, as childhood friends separated by time and space who later find each other again. Except it's not that simple, and nor should it be. Instead, the film breathes longing, connection, and a deep emotional connection into the halting exchanges between them on Skype. As they settle in and become more comfortable with each other, we see them spark to life, flashes of their original childhood cadence, and drives, illuminating their true selves to each other. The film presents as a romantic drama, but unlike most others we have seen, the will they or won't they dynamic has an overlay of trying to understand their inner truth. The excruciating pauses and stares, the slow walks together, the halting physical language between them go on for multiple beats that few other human love stories could tolerate. And of course, without letting on what the outcome is, let's just say it feels right. We look forward to more from all the talent involved in this story. And after that very real and sensitive portrait, we get a truly surreal tour de force of a film in Poor Things. The film is directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, who made the similarly offbeat films The Lobster and The Favorite. This film stars Emma Stone from The Amazing Spider-Man and La La Land as a reanimated childlike creation of a mad doctor who breaks free on an adventure of discovery that leans heavily into sexuality and objectification. The surreal look is presented sometimes in wide angle, sometimes with pastel colors, sometimes with fantastical steampunk imagery that would all be just as much at home in a Terry Gilliam film as they are here. While we are no stranger to surrealism or sexual liberation in storytelling, we are compelled to note that the film shows us that this character is genuinely a child. The science fantasy setting for how she happens to be this way doesn't actually change that. I mean, she's presented as a sex bot without the mental state to choose that role, which, we're afraid to point out, is expressly not allowed by the United Sex Worker Robot Union. Of course, you have no way of knowing this on Earth, but at the same time, we think humans can still infer that something isn't quite right with this. The fact that the film doesn't address this issue in any material way is strange. And not good strange. We like good strange. This isn't that. Anyway, finally, the last movie for us to consider is The Zone of Interest, written and directed by Jonathan Glazer, who brought us the spellbinding sexy Beast and the utterly sublime Under the Skin. Go watch that movie. The Zone of Interest stars Christian Friedel in his first major role as the commandant of the Auschwitz concentration camp, and Sandra Huller from Anatomy of a Fall above as his wife. They live a mundane life. She complains about the details, pines to relive fond memories, and feathers her own nest. Except in the background, we see a train pulling up. We see the servants are more like slaves, and the feathers in her nest seem more like treasures that belong to others that mysteriously show up for free. The context is not explicit. It doesn't need to be. We know the history. We know the consequences. Huller's obliviousness and literal carelessness about what's happening on the other side of that wall is the whole point here. That humans have the potential to be this careless is the point. That humans have the ability to point it out, pin it down, and expose this moment permanently for all time is also the point. Those are the 10 films. Our emotion chip hit multiple extremes when we initially saw them, and this is in fact happening again while encapsulating them for you now. That this can happen for a being who is not from this planet is compelling proof that human rectangular expression remains a powerful artistic force in the galaxy. If your own self-doubt and self-criticism about your movie industry is to be believed, then all we would have would be live-action cartoons and reanimated franchise reboots. But clearly that's not the whole picture, or even a majority of the picture. It's a narrative that actively denies the truth. And paradoxically, a common theme across these 10 great films is that we cannot allow truth to be pushed out of the picture by the moods and opinions of others. That humankind is broadcasting this message of finding the truth into the galaxy makes me proud to be stationed here to help contextualize your message. Knowing that this truth-telling perspective is important to us will perhaps shed light on our criteria for selecting our pick for Best Picture. In our view, the film that unhesitatingly speaks truth to power, speaks truth to the audience, speaks truth to those who initially disagree, and to those who lose their way, and even speaks truth to itself, is Oppenheimer. This film goes where few have dared to go, to actually question the US action of exploding nuclear bombs on 2 of Japan's cities. This level of introspection wasn't present in the dataset we trained on from US history books in the 1980s, and along with the nuance of the multi-threaded and unexpected storylines, the film is able to both challenge perspectives and shake the soul as it considers what we have done and what we can still do. For now, we conclude this human version of our discussion of the 10 2023 films nominated for Best Picture for the 2024 Academy Awards. If you have feedback on this discussion, please write in your comments so that we can upload the galactic version to Zogplex. We do aim to continue to engage with your human rectangular entertainment. So please watch, like, subscribe, and comment so that we can continue to have the human voice reflected in the cosmos. Until next time, farewell, humans.